Welcome to the Thriving Farmer Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Kilpatrick. Our mission is to inspire, educate, and celebrate sustainable farming. We believe that you can build a profitable, sustainable farm that gives you true farm freedom. Join us as we talk to farmers, innovators, educators, and entrepreneurs to glean their top takeaways in business and life. Hey, Thriving Farmers. Michael Kilpatrick here with yet another episode of the Thriving Farmer Podcast. And today's podcast is a special one. We are focusing on the Hurricane Helene response in the Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia area. So today, my guest is Alyson Wade, the CEO and founder of the Farm Connection, a plant nursery and garden center in Marshall, North Carolina. Alyson recently co-founded WNC Grassroots Media in response to Hurricane Helene, aiming to restore and uplift the farmers and local food system in Western North Carolina through impactful storytelling and humanitarian projects. Alyson, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here today.
Yeah, so share a little bit about kind of where Marshall, North Carolina is, and how badly did you guys get affected by the horrible rains?
Marshall, North Carolina is about 20 minutes north of Asheville, a little bit northwest. And so we were not affected here on our property in the way of downed trees or flooding on our stream banks the same way that other places were. In fact, most of Madison County, where I'm located, the storm was not that bad. But where we were affected was on down anything along the French Broad River. So what happened was all the rain kind of channeled down into the river as watersheds do. And Marshall is an interesting town where it's situated alongside the river in between two mountains. And so in other areas where the floodwaters rose up and went wide, the floodwaters rose up and only had up to go in Marshall. And so our crest in Marshall was 27 feet, over 3 feet more than the previously recorded record crest in the flood of 1916. And it rose up to the second story of some of the downtown buildings. And so downtown was pretty well destroyed for Marshall. There's more than 2 feet of muck, toxic muck in all of the buildings and throughout the streets. But for the most part, anything that wasn't along the river was really fine. And, it was an interesting storm in that on Thursday, the day before the storm actually hit, we got a lot of rain that day, as everybody did. And then on Friday, when we were expecting the second wave of water, and along with all the wind, we were spared. And on Friday, we didn't get that much rain. We got some wind. And if we had gotten that second wave like other areas did, we would have been much harder hit. But we were very lucky in this particular area, kind of shielded by two mountain ranges on either side that took the brunt of the rainfall. Here in the middle, we really just got lucky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So back in 2011, we had Hurricane, I think it was Irene, that hit New York, Vermont, and it dumped about a foot of rain in 24 hours in Vermont. And again, Vermont is similar in that it has very deep valleys and very tall mountains. We got hit nowhere near what down there got hit, but that 12 inches, I remember standing there by our fields and watching the water just raise right up in our, just watch it raise and go right over the dam we had built that morning. It proceeded to raise another 8 feet, but it was definitely, it was mind blowing just how fast. And this was something that, we had a pretty wide valley. Our valley was probably about a half mile wide. And the water, I think probably at its widest point when it went through there was probably about 1,000 feet, maybe 1,500 feet. But now if you take that and concentrate that down a couple hundred feet, and then you double the rain, and then you add the rain event beforehand, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who I've seen comments like, why weren't they ready? Why weren't they more prepared? Why didn't they know to get out of their houses? And just the sheer volume of water and how fast it all happened. And a lot of those communities, there were dam failures where everything was fine, and then all of a sudden everything was not fine, and they didn't have time to get out. And
Hmm.
yeah, the sad part is that it's really just the areas where the water, the like the streams and the creeks and the ditches and the rivers are, right? Those were the areas that really got destroyed. And there's almost a guilt that you start to feel when you see the destruction that happens
Hmm.
alongside of the waterways, and it didn't happen to you. But I think that's where all of us really are aware that it could have been a lot worse for a lot more of us, and we're pulling together for those areas that did get hit hard, and we're seeing some beautiful stories emerging from what has happened
Hmm.
here.
So talk to me about the toxic muck, because that's another thing that I think a lot of people think it was just some water. No, it wasn't just water.
Yeah, I actually have a chemical engineering background too, so I take a pretty analytical viewpoint at this. So there are different classes of toxins that we're dealing with. You have, when you think about people's houses and their cars getting washed away, there's all the petrochemicals, right? The gasoline, the oils, the coolant in vehicles and along the roads. There's household chemicals that got washed away. Alongside of the river, the French Broad specifically, there's several sewage treatment facilities. So we're dealing with biohazards. Um, there were unfortunately people who lost their lives in the river. So that's another level of biohazard that we're dealing with. And more specifically, there was industry along the river, just as every river really has industry alongside it, necessarily so because they use water. Um, I hate to call out specific industry because there have not been really published
Mm.
reports about any specific spills, but there were several plastic factories, PVC manufacturing alongside the river. And we don't know how much has been spilled into the river, but if a manufacturing facility is completely submerged in feet of water, I have to imagine that there are um, manufacturing chemicals from those facilities that spilled, and now they're in our soils. They're affecting our water. They're probably leaching into groundwater where wells are being
Hmm.
affected. They're binding with mud, and they're present in the mud and the muck that we're shoveling. So and getting the data is challenging and expensive. So, finding private labs that we can trust the data coming from them, and asking them to test for the right things. Because when it comes to analytical testing, you have to know specifically what you're looking for in order to find it in most cases. So, getting the proper testing done is challenging. We're putting together a working group where we're trying to find some of those answers, and we're talking about bioremediation that could be done along the waterways here. And it's just going to be a long process. And in the meantime, we have people who are exposing themselves and they're not aware of what the toxic hazards might be. And it's concerning.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you said there's plastic manufacturers, then they might have vinyl chloride, which is highly dangerous.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like maybe you might be aware of some of the things that are, yeah, vinyl chloride monomer is specific to primary PVC manufacturing. So,
Yeah.
and the raw materials that come before that are also highly toxic and carcinogenic and
Hmm.
dangerous to aquatic life. And the materials that are used to actually do that processing is also dangerous. Some of the most toxic and dangerous chemicals that we know of were probably present at some of these
Yeah.
facilities.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
And
it's,
here's
yeah.
and the problem with this too is, again, if those ended up leaching on top of farmland, unfortunately you got farmers who now are trying to rebuild, infrastructure, clean up things, and the last on their thinking is, oh, I need to go test this. And that was back in, again, not to bring up the whole New York thing, because we didn't, compared to what people lost here, we lost very little. We lost, a lot of vegetables and product, but we didn't lose. There was very few lives lost. There was no very few equipment lost. But that was the thing that they came to me and there's like, we need to now start to test everything. And we were like, oh my gosh, because yes, everything upriver was now in our fields.
Yeah, thankfully, a lot of the farmers were not on the banks of the French Broad. They were
Okay,
on the
good.
tributaries. And so, yes, their creeks contained like roadside and household
Yeah.
chemicals and toxins. But the majority of the farmers are not on the banks of the French Broad, and
Hmm.
at least in this area. Now, I realize that the French Broad feeds into Tennessee and eventually down to the Mississippi. So I can
Yeah.
only imagine the slug of stuff headed their way if it's not already there. And there's
Yeah.
probably going to be farmers' fields affected by it there. So yes, they need to be aware of what's coming to them.
All right. So, talk a little bit about kind of what your organization is doing to kind of help with rebuilding, or helping the people that are challenged by this.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. It's kind of spiraling out of control at this point in
Okay.
all of the best kind of ways. Our first campaign was simply a GoFundMe for local farmers and
Hmm.
grassroots food system organizing in Western North Carolina. And the backstory on that is because our nursery is focused on food and medicine plants, we work closely with a lot of the local farmers. And in the days after the storm, we had no communications. So we thought we're just going to start driving around and checking on our friends and the farms and
Mm.
see how everybody is, because we couldn't call them or see them on social media. So specifically, one of our farmer friends over at Oak Holler Farm, is the name of his farm, we went to visit him and he told us how he was donating food. Right now in Western North Carolina, there's an abundance of amazing fall crops just hitting their prime.
Hmm.
And it's like the last financial boost that these farms really get in order to start planning and getting ready for next year and purchasing for next year. And we're familiar with their financial situation to some extent. And we know that they can't just afford to be giving
Hmm.
away all of their produce. Farmers are selfless for the most part. They know it has to be done. And so they do it and they're happy to do it. They love to feed people. But we know that they're also businesses and they're going to have operating expenses, and it's not looking out really in our best interest for the farmers to be sacrificing and not being concerned with their finances and making sure that their businesses are stable. So we
Hmm.
put together a fund for primarily for reimbursing local farmers who have been donating food to relief organizations from day one. I had this script for this video. One of our strategies, right,
Yeah.
is video. The power of video is amazing for storytelling and everything that we've got happening here, just getting our story out there. So this idea for a script came to me in the middle of the night. I found some drone footage that somebody had taken of Marshall underwater. I said, I need that drone footage. I reached out to the guy who did the drone footage and he was like, yes, of course you can use it, but what are you doing? And so we
Hmm.
decided to put together this video and this fundraiser together. And since then, the two of us, we've assembled a larger team and we're starting a nonprofit from it. So the local farmers campaign is kind of our first campaign. And as we go about volunteering in our communities and observing what our communities are needing, there's still people without power, there's people without water, there's bioremediation projects and stream bank replanting projects that need to happen. All of these things, we're saying we're here for it. We're going to use video as our medium to tell our story and raise awareness and also do fundraising so that we can take these really tragic problems that our area is facing right now and turn them into solutions that are going to make a difference in people's lives. And um, this level of fulfilling work it was an interesting thing that happened, right? Like the internet and the power and the cell phone service, everything turned off. And we all got to doing this work that was feeling really fulfilling, and it felt like the work that needed to be done. And then when the internet and the power comes back on, you're like, "Oh no, the real world, here it comes again. This isn't what I want to be doing anymore. This isn't meaningful for me anymore." And so we're finding ways to put our power to good use in our community and build ourselves, a nonprofit organization that employs people in our region and completes projects that are meaningful and tells our story along the way.
Okay. So talk a little bit about kind of like, so you're doing the videos, doing fundraising. You said earlier your goal is to pay for food that the farmers are producing that they're distributing because there's a lot of food right now still going on. Talk a little bit about kind of like the general getting through the area right now. Are roads passable or how are people getting around?
Yeah, roads, most of the roads are passable. Where we're still having challenges is the mountain roads that were necessarily so right beside of
Hmm.
creeks. That's just how they build the roads around here. They say, well, the creek forged the path and we're just going to go right alongside the creek. And what happened when those creeks turned into raging rivers is they they overcame the roads and they washed them away. So a lot of the steep mountain roads, more in like the areas where the peaks are highest, not so much in like the flatter valley areas, but where the roads are really steep and windy. There's a lot of communities that are left stranded there. You can't drive in and out. They've had helicopters going in and out. We've seen them passing over
Hmm.
us every day. And yeah, I'm not entirely sure how they're going to rebuild those roads, to be honest. And a lot of the power lines followed alongside the roads. So we've just got entire communities that are completely cut off right now. I'm not sure what the solution is to that yet. I don't know how many people that is either. It's probably hard to get an actual number of how many communities and how many people live inside of those communities are still cut off.
Yeah. So there's a lot of information that's lacking just because it's very hard to get there and
Yeah,
find that
and
information out.
those people aren't able to communicate with us yet either, because if there's no way to get up there, there's no way to get a Starlink to them. But
Yeah.
they don't have internet and phone service because they don't have power. So there are some people who know some back roads and some ways to get up to them, and they're checking on them and bringing them supplies in some like roundabout 2 hour kind of back roads, gravel road ways that
Yeah.
are not the ways where most people know how to even get through. So and of course everybody's hearing about the mules that are backpacking into people too. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So talk a little bit about kind of like what folks can do to kind of support the efforts down there to rebuild and at this time it's still recovery.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely transitioning from more of that immediate disaster
Hmm.
scenario into and through this honeymoon phase. We're learning all about the stages of disaster and
Hmm.
what happens after disasters. We're definitely moving into more of a consideration for how we rebuild, and also looking for how we're gonna make it through the winter. Our first frost, our first probably hard-ish freeze, right, is coming tonight.
Hmm.
And so then your heart goes out to all of the people that still don't have power. Um, how people can help, I know that we still need generators. We need warm blankets. We need other winter gear. There are some organizations that are collecting those materials. One of my favorites is they're called ROAR. It's the Rural Organizing and Resilience Group. And so that's a great place to donate supplies. definitely focusing on winter supplies at this
Hmm.
point. We don't need any more bottled water. We don't need any more diapers. We don't need any more toilet paper and paper towels. And we probably could talk about how those things are actually like the outpouring of those kinds of donations is that has actually become part of our problem at this
That you
point.
have too much stuff.
Too much stuff. Yeah. In fact,
Mm.
our school, they would like to begin operating again. They have power, water, and internet. But
Yeah.
the school became a disaster recovery and supplies area. And now they can't reopen the school because there's so many supplies. They don't know what to do with them.
Oh,
So
wow.
please, no more immediate disaster supplies.
Yeah.
I think also there's going to be the need, and we're not quite ready for it yet, but I want people, one of the messages that I would love for people to hear is that we're aware that we will be forgotten at some point, just like many places that have experienced disaster are. And for those of you who really want to do something for us now, to just hold that in your hearts and remember that in a month or 2 months or 6 months. Check in with us and see what we need down the line. And what we're going to need down the line is going to be people who can inspect our buildings to tell us if the foundations and the structures are still safe. We're going to need electricians and people who know how to install drywall and install windows and doors and help us actually do the rebuilding. We could use like a truckload of 20-foot I-beams so that we can put together bridges for people that are in communities that can't be reached right now. So, those kinds of building and structural materials and expertise to help us accomplish some of these rebuilding projects are really what we're going to be needing in the next weeks and months. And I wish I knew what that organizing was going to look like at this point, but I know that Roar is going to continue to be a good source of information, and they're not going anywhere. This is what they train for. So that one would be a good one to keep an eye on to see what our needs into the future are going to be.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, and I think you're absolutely correct. Is that because Appalachia, because it's hard to get to. It's not a very visible aspect, that it will get forgotten. So we do need to ensure that we are thinking long term about how we're going to support this long term. Share with me a little bit about kind of like the community, because obviously communities is when you come together, it takes a community. So talk to me a little bit about kind of like what your small community is like.
I think it's unlike anything that I could even begin to describe.
Mm.
There are a lot of people that have been going around documenting what is happening here, kind of going from town to town. And specifically here in Marshall, they say that it's unlike anything they've seen in any of the other places. The way that the community has come together and organized and gotten straight down to the dirty work of doing what it takes to get the job done has been absolutely amazing to witness. Um, a small business here in town called Nanostead, they're somewhat adjacent, about a half mile from downtown, opened their entire business to relief efforts and have put together this that's called the Nanostead Hub now, where down volunteers who want to clean up downtown can show up here at this Nanostead Hub. There's appropriate PPE. They get trained on how to put on the PPE. Everything that you need is there. They get shuttled down to downtown, to the working sites there. There's breakfast, lunch, and dinner happening at this Nanostead kitchen.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And then there's also like a supplies drop off and redistribution happening there. And you really see the people who are the organizers at heart. You see everybody kind of identifying what role isn't filled yet or what need hasn't been met yet. and figuring out how to step into it. We're crying together. We're hugging. We're singing together. We're we're all wondering why it has taken a disaster like this to become so close. And I think that there's a lot to learn here from what's happening specifically in Marshall about how to be better prepared for disasters in the future, how to respond to disasters in a meaningful and effective ways, how to organize and pull together, and what resources are needed to get the job done. It's the community is really something special here in Marshall.
That's good to hear. Anything else you'd like to share before we go?
Yeah, I actually have some data for you that I just got
Absolutely.
in from my project manager who's on our local farmer project. So she went out, one of our models, how we're actually giving money out to the farmers, is that we're going out to the farms and we're getting footage and we're building connections with them. And so it's taking us a while to actually get the money to farmers, although I think it's much faster than a lot of the other relief programs are. So we're putting checks directly into farmers' hands when we go out to visit their farms. And so as of about an hour ago, we've distributed $67,627 to 15 different farms in the area. And that includes people who are donating vegetables, milk, eggs, beef, pork, chicken. And it also is stipends for some farmers who lost everything and they didn't even have food to donate. So we're just giving them stipends. Of course, we cannot rebuild their entire farm with a budget of $200,000, right? But we're giving them
Yeah.
stipends that will help them with making sure their employees get paid in the meantime, some cleanup efforts, so whatever expenses they have, cover crops, and the things that they need to put their fields to rest and start the recovery process over the winter so that hopefully they can continue operating in the spring. And so that's about a third of the money that we've raised so far has gone directly into the hands of farmers. And we've got a list of at least 15 or 20 more that have reached out to us. And as farmers learn about our program, they keep reaching out to us. There's a new 2, 3, 4 farms every day at this point.
Yes.
So, we really look forward to continuing to put this money directly in the hands of farmers for whatever they need without the red tape associated. Just kind of going on our own personal connections with them and an understanding of honesty and transparency. And so, yeah, I just wanted to give you a little bit of data around what we're doing and also some other projects that we're going to be doing with our organization. I think I mentioned before that we are starting a bioremediation working group.
Yes.
So we've just had a meeting today about what our next steps there are. And we're particularly looking at protecting communities along the French Broad River that have been directly affected by the toxic muck, but these people are still living in those conditions. So we're going to try to work on remediation of their soils and their environment in the immediate area of where people are working and living. We've got a project where we are identifying some of those communities that are up on top of mountains that have a 6 to 8 month timeline before they are projected to have power again. And we're working with a group of off-grid experts to install solar systems or micro hydro systems for those households that do not have power and are not projected to have power for quite some time. We've already got an organization that we're partnering with to do stream bank restoration plantings so that we can, when things like this can and will happen again, if we can establish those root systems ahead of time, then we're going to be ahead of the game. So we're looking at a stream bank restoration, and we're also looking at some water filtration projects that will hopefully,
Yeah.
Stop the flow of bottled water coming into our area and focus on more efficient solutions for getting people healthy, safe drinking water. So our new nonprofit organization is biting off some big chunks, and
Absolutely.
we're excited to make an impact in the community.
Okay. Well, Alyson, thank you so much for coming on. We'll put everyone your details in the show notes at the Thriving Farmers podcast page. Let me redo that. Well, well, Alyson, thank you so much for coming on. Do you guys have a URL that folks can go to? I mean, we'll put everything in the show notes on the Thriving Farmer podcast website.
Yeah, our for the Farm Connection, there's a link to our local farmers GoFundMe campaign, and so that
Awesome.
is the Farm Connection Madco for Madison County .com, and then our nonprofit is WNC Grassroots Media.org. And so, and you can search for, we have Facebook and Instagram set up for both of those accounts, so you can find us on those as well. And we'll probably get a YouTube channel going as well.
Awesome. Well, Alyson, thank you so much for your work with this, and thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate your support.
So there you have it, another episode in the books. So I'd love if you would hop on over to iTunes and leave us a rating and a review. Those mean everything to us. We love to hear what you're thinking. If you have a podcast guest that you can recommend, please pop on over to the Thriving Farmer Podcast website and leave us a review. That's thrivingfarmerpodcast.com.